found out what were the 10 best kept secrets according to fathers of the 1960s. And the first one is most obvious. There are no set rules. Every dad does what he thinks he can do, hopefully, and he does that to the very best of his ability. When I look back on my childhood, there were men that emulated what dads ought to be. Some were fictitious, some were real. The thing that we need to look at this morning, and this is what we're going to look at in the book of Ecclesiastes, we've been looking at Solomon from a different perspective, but you know, when I think about fathers, and I think about, since I am one, and I'm a grandfather, and one day I'll be a great-grandfather, there are still certain expectations that we all have. And this is a messy sermon, okay? This is not your 3 points in a poem. This is a life sermon. This is a sermon that, a message that I believe that the Lord was dealing with me all week long. Now, in case you didn't know, first part of the week I was in Missouri with my grandson, teaching him how to fly fish. And we were on our 3rd annual fishing trip. And so on the way back, just outside of Kingston, I saw this banner. And I thought I had misread it, and so I slowed down just to make sure that I was reading it correctly. I thought it was one of those GOAT banners, greatest of all time. But that's not what it said. It was a picture of a man, and it was a nice-sized banner, very well done. And it had G-O-A-D, GOAD. And I thought, well, no, that's just silly. Who wants to be goaded into doing anything? But then I got it. Greatest of all dads. And I thought to myself, you know, that's not half bad. To be the greatest of all dads. I mean, who really can claim that? Really no one but God. I mean, when you get right down to it, the only one that even has the right to that throne sits on a throne. And his name, as we have been finding out, is Yahweh Elohim. Or in this case, Yahweh Jireh, the Father that provides. And so I got to thinking about that. And as I thought about that, I thought that we all have this picture of what our dads should be. And then there's the reality of what our dads are. And most of the time, those things don't necessarily go together. As a child growing up, I had a certain vision of my father, and I'm certain that some of you have also. One of the things about this is we don't get to choose them. As a child, there were those things that I was exposed to, like Andy Griffith, and you're going to laugh, but Father Knows Best, and little sitcoms like that. My favorite, of course, of all time was Beaver Cleaver. Yeah, that was my favorite because I could identify with this kid called Beaver, okay? And so, and we all have this idea in our mind as to what greatness is. Now, the Bible teaches us something that automatically should set us straight. First of all, there's none righteous, no, not one. We've all gone out of the way, Romans chapter 3 and verse 10. There's none. God looked in the book of Psalms, and it was recorded that there's none. I looked around at the sons of men, and there was none that just naturally seeks me. And so before we put ourselves on this high pedestal, I want us to recognize the fact that the best example that any of us could have is our Heavenly Father. But not everybody has great memories of their father. And so that I can universally draw everyone in, I will occasionally I will say father and mother. That little excerpt from Andy Griffith, what a time capsule. Can you remember back when a quarter would suffice? I mean, nowadays they'll look at you like, what's that? They want the paper stuff, and they want much of the paper stuff, right? But the principle is still the same, and that's what I like. I like the principle. I wrote down a few things just by way of an introduction that I thought you might find interesting, if not humorous. The first I've already given you. The number one rule for fathers and sons is that there is no rule for father and sons. We all do, and we all say, and we all act like we think we should, and we do that hopefully in the best interest of our children. But I got 10 suggestions from Andy Griffith, and here they are, and they're not half bad. 10 things that we should follow, and I'm just going to give them to you, and you can certainly think about them. First is compassion. I think it goes without saying that we live in a world that lacks compassion. So to show compassion, it's important. Humor. Life is so serious that sometimes we need to take a break from it. And I think that those that can look at life and laugh at their own mistakes are probably wise in doing so. How about this? Ethics and morality. We live in a world that you have to search far and wide to find people with any type of morality or ethical conduct. Humility. In a world that points to number one, we need that. We need genuine humility. Discipline. That's a dirty word in some circles. To discipline a child is to love that child. I'll show you that in just a minute. I think most of you know that. Stability. Now, that's a rocky road to have to travel down in our culture, isn't it? Stability. We don't live in the 60s. We live in the 21st century. Hello, McFly. It's the 21st century. And our families are not the same as they used to be. That's not necessarily a good thing. There are some principles that we can glean from every generation. Now, here's something that I do know is true. The previous generation always finds a way to blame it on the generation before them. And I'm no exception. I can sit and I can stand and I can say that there are certain things that when I was a child, I walked 5 miles through the sleet and snow. And you know what? I did. But the fact of the matter is that doesn't fly by today's standard because we're supposed to be on a moped or something else. I don't know. The stability in the home is what certainly is lacking. How about this? Wisdom. Wisdom. That's what we need. We need wisdom in our homes. How about this? Respect. Respect for authority. Respect for each other. There is that which is called self-respect. I have a little bit of a problem with that by definition, but the reality of it is that we should have a healthy respect of others and ourselves. How about this? Priorities. A father that prioritizes his family and puts his family before himself. The dad that I grew up with did that. And this isn't a checklist to see if my father, cut the mustard, but this is just simply a suggestion according to Andy Griffith. And then the final one is you can have a home with a lot of rules and regulations, but if you don't have love in that home, it's all for naught. So I don't know what you think of, since we're all fallen in the first place and we all need God's grace. We tend to look at our fathers through a dark lens. We can't see everything about what makes that man tick. I don't know about you, but I was fearful of my father. I believe that there was a healthy fear. We're living in a whole different world. And so in order to make this relevant, I'm going to just simply preach the Word because I think the Word transcends all time. It transcends all generations. The principles that are true and were true then are still true today. The perfect father is a combination of both wisdom, strength, and spiritual prowess. You know what I came up with? He's a ward cleaver with the statue of the Rock, and he has the inside of a James Dobson. I don't know that guy. I'm not that guy. I don't know how you view your father or your great-grandfather, your grandfather, but I kind of thought of it like this. And we're in the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 9. I kind of thought of it like this. As I was there in Bennett Springs with my grandson, and the sun, as it burst forth through the trees. And there I was, folks, teaching my grandson how to trout fish and to fly fish. And there I am with, hat tipped, rod bent, trout on, standing there as this picturesque, stoic individual that he calls Fadi, or grandfather. And as I looked over and all eyes were upon me, I thought, man, it doesn't get any better than this. And then asked me about 5 minutes later. I turned around to walk over to the bank, and there was a rock that God had placed there centuries before I ever stepped foot in that stream. And that rock did not move, but I did. And I hit that rock, and I went head first into that stream for all eyes to see. My grandson looks around, and there I am bobbing up and down like a drowned rat. And I thought in that moment, in that very moment, I thought, sometimes there's just too many rocks. And he comes over and he picks me up, my grandson, and he walks me by the arm to the bank. And in that moment, I thought, this is a lot like life. Life for the Father isn't about always being in that stoic limelight of perfection or persona that we think our kids want. Sometimes they need to see you fall flat on your face. I don't recommend it in a cold stream of water, but nonetheless, little ears and eyes are watching and they're listening all the time. And sometimes it's not in the height of glory or when everything's going fine and it's going great, but it's when you're building them something out in the shop and you hit your thumb with a hammer. When you fall face first into a stream. On the way back, we had a really successful trip. On the way back, the truck had a light come on that I had not seen before. Now, we had something previously tested out, and I thought, well, he said it was okay. But the truck went into limp mode, Brother Logan. And I was going to have to travel 300 miles doing under 60 miles an hour. And I'm like, that's never going to fly. And so in that moment, I called my wife, and she's on the loudspeaker, and she's reminding me, as if I needed to be reminded, that there are eyes that are watching and ears that are listening. Be careful what you say and how you handle adversity. And I agreed with her that he more than likely in that week learned more about how I reacted to adversity than he did about how I reacted when things went the way I thought they should. And life's like that. It's messy. Solomon knows that in Ecclesiastes chapter 9. He knows. Now, Solomon was probably one of the greatest, one of the wisest kings. Not so much as far as a father. We know that he had 700 wives, 300 concubines. I don't know what that was like in that household. I don't want to even beg to guess. But only 3 children are recorded. His son Rehoboam and 2 daughters. I believe Basemath was one and Taphath was the other one. They're the only ones that are recorded. Much of the first 7 chapters of the book of Proverbs are devoted to lessons that he taught his son. And so Solomon gives this advice here in the book of Ecclesiastes, and it's probably the greatest introduction for any father, would-be father or mother. Because there are 3 things that Solomon suggests, and then as a backdrop to those three things, he throws out life. In other words, he's saying that life is serious, and the way that we approach life is serious. And he gives three things that every father, every mother ought to strive to maintain in their home, because here at the end of the day is the most important thing I'll probably say. It doesn't really matter if I'm the greatest dad in all the world, if I'm the greatest grandfather in the whole world. It just matters that I'm the greatest grandfather to him. It just matters that I'm the greatest dad to her. She's in the kitchen getting ready for our feast, indoor picnic, we're going to call it. That matters. That matters to me. In Ecclesiastes chapter 9, verse 9, verse 7 says, "Go thy way, eat thy bread with joy, and drink thy wine with a merry heart, for God now accepteth thy works. Let thy garments be always white, and let thy head lack no ointment." Let me tell you what he's not saying. He's not saying, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we die. It's an imperative. He's saying that because God is over, because God is at the heart, you can eat, you can drink, and you can do it with a certain gladness if and when you recognize these next three things. Now, they're not as such particular to rearing children, but I think that they fit, and that's why I'm going to give them to you. Let thy garments be always white, and thy head lack no ointment. Well, it's a simple truth is that our kids, they can't see everything there is to see about us. I'm not so certain that I want that kind of access, but here's what I do want them to see. I want them to see a certain transparency. They can see me when life is good, when everything seems to be working the way that I want it to work, and that they can see how I respond to life when it doesn't work out. And you know what I'm finding to be true? Most of the time, life doesn't go the way I want it to. It doesn't. I'm teaching you a principle this morning. You can't just put out on a marquee, church picnic, and expect the neighborhood to show up. I didn't think they would. What I can expect is that when doors are knocked and we meet certain needs, then people will show up. And so I've got something in mind for that for next week. Now here, three things. Verse 9, live joyfully with the wife whom thou lovest all the days of thy life, of thy vanity, which he hath given thee under the sun all the days of thy vanity. He uses that twice. I'll explain that in a second. For that is thy portion in this life, and in thy labor which thou takest under the sun. Three things. Number one, live life like there's no tomorrow. Live life like this is important, like you're important, like this moment is important, because I'm not guaranteed of a tomorrow. And if falling in that stream is any indication as to what life's going to be like in the years ahead, oh boy, I'm going to have somebody follow me around with a, well, you do the math. Live your life to the very fullest. That's what Solomon was simply teaching. You live it to the fullest. He then goes on to say, and I'll give you these three so if you write them down, you'll have them. You're to love. First of all, you're to live. Secondly, you're to love. And thirdly, you're to labor. What do you live for? Who do you love? Why do you labor? What are you laboring in? That's what he goes on to say. Whatsoever thy hand findeth to do, doeth it with thy might, for there is no work, there is no device, there is no knowledge, there is no wisdom in the grave. Whither thou goest. That might seem like a bummer to us, but here's the thing. I am closer to that day than I used to be. I'm pretty sure of it. And some of you are also. And so if I take that advice and I take it to heart, then being the greatest dad to my family, being the greatest grandfather to my family is really what's important. That they see, and sometimes they will and sometimes they won't. These are three suggestions that are backed up by one illustration. So first of all, we're to live our life to the very fullest. I don't know if life is possible to be lived with no regret, because the longer I live, the more regrets that I have. Things that I would have rather had done differently. I try not to live my life with regret, but the fact of the matter is you can't live this life with not having some regret. I try not to make it a point of reference where my grandson says, you remember that day back when I was 14, and I won't say how old you were, but you hit that rock and you went under that. I regret hitting that rock, but I don't regret how I responded. There are things and there are times when I have to say I regret. We all do. There are no perfect mothers or fathers. And the number one rule is that there are no rules. Oh, there are some suggestions, and there's some things that we should take seriously. Here it is. Live your life, because it's short. It's short. There was a day when I was 14 years of age when I thought living to be 40. In fact, I sat in a math classroom, and I figured out how old I would be at the turn of the century. And to me, that was ancient. I thought, I'm going to be, 40 years old? In the year 2000, oh, that's old. Well, guess what? Now I'm looking back on that, and I'm thinking, well, that's not so old. Live your life to the fullest, because life is short. It's too short to hate anybody. It's too short to, and I copied this from somebody. He said, and I quote, it's too short for fake butter, fake cheese, or fake people. Well, it might be, but there's plenty of that to go around. The reason that there are so many contrasts in life are given in verse number 10. It's this contrast that we have. Whatever you find in your hand to do, do it with all of your might. For there's no work, no device, no knowledge, no wisdom, that once you're in the grave, for this life, that's it. Now, we all know there's another life. But for this one, it's over. The psalmist David, he prayed, Lord, make me to know my end. I don't want to know. I think that God keeps us in the dark for a reason. I don't know why anybody would pray that way. He wanted to know when and how and where he was going to die. And then he came up with the same conclusion. Life is altogether vanity. I'm waiting on you, God. I'm not waiting on the hammer to fall. I'm not waiting on death. It'll be here soon enough. You're who I wait for. You're who I trust in. So Solomon's saying, you need to live your life to the fullest. And that is increasingly more difficult as we get older. We have aches and pains, and we have things that beset us that make it more difficult. To be a wise grandfather is to see myself as my grandson sees me. And sometimes that's a little humbling. You know what hurt the worst about falling in that stream? Anybody want to take a guess? My pride. My pride. Man. Which are you going to remember more? Me with bent rod or me with bent knees? Now, come on. They're all waiting for an answer. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe both equally. I'm not sure. And then to love. You know, in Proverbs chapter 3, and I'm just going to give you this because it's mindful of the fact of, as to God and how much he loves us. My son, Proverbs chapter 3, verse 11, despise not the chastening of the Lord, neither be weary of his correction. For whom the Lord loveth, he correcteth, even as a father the son in whom he delighteth. No, Opie, you're going to get a quarter. I don't even know what that... Some kids today would think that we were being cruel. Live life being thankful, trusting, and true to God's provision, his peace, his pleasure, and his purpose. That's what verses 9 and 10 are about. It's in an imperative. It's taken for granted that you and I will think that way and that we'll do that. Jehovah Jireh, God provides. So love. How are we to love? Who are we to love? Well, I believe first of all we're to love God. I don't think that it's an apology. I don't think that it should be an exception. I think it should be the norm in a believer's life that my kids, my grandkids know, yeah, he loves God. That's not a conflict of interest. He loves God. I wanted my kids, now once again, you got to look past me here. That I'm not the perfect example, obviously, but I wanted my kids to know that I love the Lord. And that wasn't a conflict of interest. That if I could love the Lord with all my heart, and I believe it's Matthew chapter 22, where Jesus was asked, what is the greatest commandment? And he says, to love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind, and with all thy strength. And then the second is to love thy neighbor as thyself. I didn't think it was a conflict of interest for my kids or my grandkids to know that I love God. This world needs to see fathers that love the Lord. Secondly, and I'll say it like it's written, they need to see a father who loves his wife. I wanted my kids to know that I love the Lord and I love their mother. Now, I'll start meddling just a little. I live in a world today where the kids dictate to the parents who does what. There's another episode that I was going to show with about Opie and Andy, where Andy is explaining to this hobo that it's not up to Opie to decide. That young'uns need guidance. He doesn't get to choose. I choose for him. And we live in a world where that's just not the way it works anymore. And I'm very careful and very cautious to be too condemning, but the fact of the matter is, you got children that are making decisions that they were never supposed to have to make. Can you believe that I'm actually in a pulpit talking about a child's gender and that they have, and that there are parents that are teaching them to choose their gender? Forgive me for this, but I want to slap them silly for that. You want to what? You want to, I can help you with this. No. I wanted my kids, I want my grandkids to know I love the Lord God first and foremost, and that I love their mother, their grandmother second, and then I love them. I had her before I had them. And I had him before I had her. I'm not getting any amens here, but it's still true. You say, is that it? That's it. Solomon's saying, live your life to the fullest because it's short. And then love. Love to the extent that you love the Lord your God, the wife of your youth. The children will come. Blessed is the man who has his quiver full. I stopped at 3. I believe that a quiver is actually 5, but we won't go there. And then here's the dirty word of verse number 10. Labor, work. Oh my, work. It's not a dirty word. To labor. 1 Corinthians 10:31 says, whatever you do, whether you eat or you drink, you do it all to the glory of God. That's what he's saying right there. That's the parallel verse there in verse 10. Whatsoever's in thy hand and what it finds to do, do it with all your might. So labor. If you can labor in love, now listen to this. If you can labor in love and live like you like it, you probably are a pretty decent example of a dad. If you can labor in love and live like you like it, you're probably a pretty good example of a father. Galatians chapter 6, don't be deceived. I won't add to the word, but I'll just simply explain it this way. What you see right now is in many ways a result of sowing. And as sad as it is, and it certainly saddens me, some of what we reap right now is what's being sown and what has been sown. God's not deceived, he's not mocked. Whatsoever a man sows, that shall he also reap. For he that soweth to the flesh shall of the flesh reap corruption, but he that soweth to the Spirit shall of the Spirit reap everlasting life. Life everlasting. Let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap if we faint not. There you have it. Now here's the example, and then we'll close. If that were it, if I said, look, dads, grandfathers, moms, grandmothers, if you can live your life to the fullest in front of your kids, your grandkids, and you can love the Lord thy God with all your heart, your mind, your soul, and your spirit, and that you can love your spouse, and you model that in front of your children, you're well on your way of being their greatest dad, their greatest grandfather, their greatest grandmother, their greatest mother. If you can live, love, and labor like that. Now here's the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey would say. I returned and I saw under the sun that the race is not to the swift, nor the battle to the strong, neither yet bread to the wise, nor yet riches to men of understanding, nor yet favor to men of skill. And you're going to want explanation here. I'm going to probably not give you a whole lot. But time and chance happened to what? To them all. That's life. Life's messy. The race isn't always won by the fastest. He trips. He falls. The battle's not always won by the strongest. There are things in life that are contradictory. They don't add up. They don't work out. I read something this week that absolutely set me on my ear. The last 100 years, America was a powerhouse. In the next 100, China will be. And then the only thing that gave me solace was below it said, yeah, right, made in China. Did you know that China has bought up more concrete in the last 10 years than we did in the previous 50? I don't know who well, let me rephrase that. I do know who the superpower is. And it's not China, and it's not America. Time and chance happen to all men. Sometimes the rock is just in the stream. Sometimes no matter how well you do things, they don't work out like you want. That's life in the real realm. That's living life. That's what happens. It's not going to be in all the, and I'm fortunate as a grandfather because my grandkids live in Mississippi and Tyler. So they only get to see me for short little bursts, little periods of time. They don't live with me. You know, I don't know if it's sad, but one of the truths that we have to understand in the culture that we live right now is that my wife is a first and second grade teacher, and a lot of her students are being raised by the grandparents. Life's not the same as it was with Beaver Cleaver and Andy Griffith. And I could go farther back, but I don't think you'd remember it. So that's what Solomon is throwing out there. in the backdrop of those three things, there's all of this stuff. Time and chance happen to all men. For a man also knoweth not his time, as the fishes that are taken in an evil net, as the birds that are caught in a snare, so are the sons of men. It falleth suddenly upon them. This wisdom have I seen also under the sun, and it seemed great unto me. And then he gives this example, and I'll just give it, and then we'll close. There was a little city, a few men within it, and there came a great king against it, and besieged it, and built a great bulwark against it. In other words, he was preparing to, for whatever reason, maybe he wanted the resource of that little city, maybe he just wanted the prowess that came with conquering this little city. We don't know. But he builds up his reinforcements so that he can take this city. Now there was found in it a poor wise man. Okay, that's not an oxymoron. That tells me that you can be wise and you don't have to be rich. A poor wise man. Is there such a guy out there? I believe so. If we keep going like the way we are, there'll be more of us like that. Poor wise man. And he by his wisdom delivered the city. We don't know how. We don't know if he created some miracle of modern warfare. We don't know if he went and negotiated with the king of the great army. We don't know. We don't know. We just know that he was wise, and that it was by his wisdom that he delivered the city. Yet no man remembered that same poor man. That's life. Then said I, wisdom is better than strength. Nevertheless, the poor man's wisdom is despised, and his words are not heard. The words of wise men are heard in quiet, more than the cry of him that ruleth among fools. Where do we go for wisdom today? I'm going to trip you up. Get ready. Wisdom is better than weapons of war, but one sinner destroyeth much good. I'll tell you where we go. We go to the Lord first. We do. And we go to some places that are not frequented often. We go to some men with white hair or no hair, little hair, turning hair. We go with those that have gone before us, and we sit at their feet and we listen. There's an art form that's lost in our culture today, taking the time to listen to those that have experience, to those that have wisdom. Are you that kind of guy? Are you that kind of dad? I hope I am. That when life gets tough, and it will, that they have a gray-haired or a white-haired old man that's seen enough of life and has walked with God long enough that he can give them the right counsel. Because there's a whole world of evil counsel. There's a whole world of neglect. There's a whole world that refuses to listen to a poor wise man. And so, on this Father's Day, I don't know who you regard or who you give much attention to in your family, but I would pray that there would be some godly men that you have sat at their feet long enough that you know they're going to give you wise counsel. Now, it might not be what you want to hear, but it's going to be wise counsel. And I'm going to tell you how you know that. Because they've lived long enough to work and love, and they've lived it. They've lived it. And that's what Solomon was saying. That's what he was trying to teach. That's what the Lord, through inspiration, was saying. You may not be heard down at the Chamber of Commerce in Denison. You might not even be heard. Okay. You might not even be regarded in the Emmanuel Baptist Church. But it matters what he thinks. It matters what my daughter and my sons think. It matters what my wife thinks. Lord, I pray that this morning on this Father's Day, Lord, we know there are no perfect fathers except one. Lord, I pray that we might recognize in our own life that we have only one life to live. Help us live it with little or no regret. Help us to live it because it's short. Help us to love those that we're to love, and we're to love them emphatically. Help our children to be able to see that through the example of living and loving, that the work that we do, the labor of love that we invest ourselves in, that it's worth it at the end of the day. I believe that my kids are worth it. I believe my grandkids are worth it. And their kids will be worth it. However many generations you have me to be responsible for, they're worth it. And help me to trust in you, and help me to recognize that as I take meat and as I drink, I can do it with a glad heart, because you've provided and you've given us the grace to be able to endure a world that's gone crazy. It's turned upside down, where values are very difficult to even find. And Lord, things are so strained right now. People are fearful. Some don't know where the next meal will come from. They don't know how they're going to get around. Being a good father is the last thing on their mind. Change that. Men need your grace. Women need your grace. They need the love of Christ in their life. There's a neighborhood behind us here. Help us to be smart enough to know how to reach them. I pray in Jesus' name, amen.